Audio and video. Okay, we are live. All right. Welcome, welcome. Mr. Thomas, Mr. Bohm, how are you guys?
I'm good. I'm good.
Good, thank you. We're probably
Amazing.
just only the three of us at the moment because we're still 5 minutes up from the appointed time. So you can see people who come in, Chris?
Yes, we are live on LinkedIn now. So,
But if people join, do you see that?
yes, I am. Actually, no, I can't see that.
Okay.
Oh,
Metrics.
How can you tell if someone's asked a question?
Oh, we have a thumbs up on LinkedIn. We have 7 people live so far on LinkedIn. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. We'll be starting in 4 minutes. So we're just waiting for people to join. We are live on LinkedIn. We'll be live on Instagram as well. Welcome, everybody. We will be starting in 4 minutes. We are talking about the truth about long COVID with our Ask the Expert series. We had the infamous David and Doug. So you'll be getting to know them shortly. And we'll just wait a couple more minutes. Hey, Allah. Nice to see you on Instagram. And we are live on LinkedIn as well. And we're streaming on StreamYard. So this is a first for everyone. We had a bit of technical difficulties as always, but we got there. Got right, Doug? David?
Yes.
We're all here.
Beautiful, beautiful. We'll start in 3 minutes. David, where are you in the world?
I'm in Bangkok, Thailand.
Beautiful. And how's the weather there right now?
The sun is shining. It's the what they call the cooler season. It's 27 degrees. So it's usually the best time to visit Thailand, December, January, February. So anyone who's thinking of traveling post COVID-19, Thailand's a good place to come this time of year.
Yeah, when am I getting an invite, David?
At the end of the seminar.
Okay. And Doug, where are you right now?
In Palo Alto, which is in the middle of the Silicon Valley in California.
Fantastic. What's the weather there at the moment?
It's getting towards evening now, and it's been storming, most of the day. So it's just raining, and we've got a lot of wind right now.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
we're hitting the summer now in Australia, so we're live from Sydney. And so I'm excited to hit the beach. I've been told that the weather's really nice and the temperature of the water. So both of you, I'd love to see you guys, David back here in Sydney and Doug for your first time as well.
Great.
Okay.
Doug's never been to Australia before?
No, he hasn't.
Yeah. Oh, no, I've been to Sydney. I've been to Sydney, and there was some fantastic ice cream that I had, and I was by that bridge and the opera house, and there was a big Ferris wheel, and it looked really pretty. I just didn't get a chance to explore it. I was only there for 4 hours. It was a New Zealand whirlwind visit. So,
all right. When was that, Doug? I forgot.
Maybe 15, 20 years ago. My wife and I went on a caving safari in New Zealand, and on our way back, we stopped off at Sydney, and we had a fairly long layover. So I talked the people in there to let me off the plane, so which they probably wouldn't do today, but they let us get out, and we went into town, and it was really cool. I'd like to go back.
Amazing. All right, if you're on Instagram, you can join LinkedIn, and you can actually join the session on LinkedIn Live. And anyone that is live and on LinkedIn, please join. Cool. Okay, we've hit 12 o'clock Sydney time. What time is it in Palo Alto? 4 p.m.?
5 p.m.
5 p.m.
Yeah.
So good afternoon if you're in the US. Good morning in our region in Asia. So welcome everyone to Ask the Expert series, discussing the future of healthcare and the truth behind long COVID. For those that don't know me, my name is Chris Peralta, and I am the founder and CEO of Silicon Valley Headquarters. Before we start, let me give you all a quick background why I created these Ask the Expert series. One, Silicon Valley is primarily a mentoring platform where I believe a mentor's hindsight could be a startup's foresight. These experts have the experience, and since time is our most important asset, they can potentially help accelerate your business ventures and understanding. Two, the last few years, every team meeting I have with Doug and David, we always start the conversations and I ask tons of questions about this thing called COVID. And with so much misinformation out there, I thought it would be good to share these amazing experts with you all, and they're willing, so you can ask your questions. And three, I know we all have Zoom fatigue, but this is a great way to build a global ecosystem of thought leaders and collaborate together. Now, I've been running these Ask the Expert sessions offline with different client communities, but they all have been around what I call Web 2.5 or Web 3 for good projects. So if you want to learn more information about that, please message me offline or email chris@siliconvalleyhq.com. So today's agenda is simple. One, our amazing experts, Doug and David, will introduce themselves shortly. Two, we'll have a fireside chat, panel discussion, taking a very high level about broad topics around the truth behind long COVID. And then the last 30 or more minutes, we'll have ample time to hear your questions and get our experts to answer. Quick housekeeping. Please prepare your questions and be thoughtful of the audience time when asking them. At any time, you can ask or send your questions on the LinkedIn chat, and it'll come through to our StreamYard stream. We also want this to be as interactive as possible, so if I see any questions that come up, I will answer them. Okay. So without further ado, first, I want you to introduce you to my good friends and experts here, seasoned experts. First, the amazing, the infamous Dr. Doug. Don't be deceived. He is one of the smartest guys you'll meet in Silicon Valley, with 40 plus patents under his belt. We call him a mad scientist, an inventor, and was actually one of the top scientists brought in for the US COVID task force. The one, the only Dr. Doug. Please introduce yourself and tell me one fun fact about Dr. Doug.
Okay. Well, I'll start with who I am. I'm an immunologist and cut my teeth on HIV as an emerging disease, and have worked in other emerging diseases since then. And I'm also a serial entrepreneur and have founded a number of companies, and so all those patents had to go somewhere. And anyway, I guess a fun fact would be that I'm an explorer, kind of by my nature, and so I explore caves and travel to find and search caves, and so I enjoy that a fair amount.
Beautiful. Next, we have the extraordinary David Boehm, serial entrepreneur, investor, philanthropist, and good friend. I love his passion for business, but closer to his heart, the purpose-driven approach and mindset he has. David, please introduce yourself and tell me one fun fact about David Boehm.
Thanks, Chris, and welcome everyone to this webinar. Those of you in North America, good afternoon, good evening. Those of you in Asia, good morning. I'm talking to you from Bangkok in Thailand, and actually my background is finance. I'm an accountant by profession, so I can't claim to be a scientific or medical expert on the topic. However, I thought I could share my views, having talked to many intelligent scientists like Doug from a patient perspective as to the impact of COVID and long COVID on individuals and what we can do to mitigate that. We have a company called Miska One Health, which is an integrated functional medical company with clinics in Germany, Thailand, and Hong Kong. And so we actually have protocols to diagnose and treat long COVID, because long COVID, it's so many things, and it's difficult for people to actually understand what's going on. And there's not that much in the conventional medicine toolkit that can actually treat the underlying causes of long COVID. In terms of a fun fact, well, I guess I have 6 dogs at my home in Yangon in Myanmar, and I haven't been to see them for nearly 3 years because of the restrictions of COVID. And then, as everybody knows, there's been a coup. So I'd love to get back and see my dogs as soon as possible. So it's fun, but it's not so much fun when you can't see your pets.
Yeah, no, definitely. Wow, that's a long time. Okay, so we're going to have a quick icebreaker as well. I'm going to do some rapid fire questions. You guys are familiar with this. Please, one word answer or one sentence at the most. So, Dr. Doug, let's start with you.
Okay, yeah, so good.
Maximum one word. Where were you born?
Palo Alto. That's 2 words.
What was your nickname growing up?
Doug.
Name your first girlfriend.
I can't remember.
Okay.
What's your I had a couple that called me. Probably Melissa.
One
a
word.
Different Melissa.
Okay.
Yeah.
Your middle name.
Westcott.
Westcott. How would your parents describe you in one word?
Curious.
Favorite food?
Pot stickers.
Yes. What's your superpower based on your skill, passion?
Not my power of 8.
Okay, power of 8, 8 superpowers.
Power of 8, 8 superpowers. I would say smoothing complex systems, understanding and smoothing complex systems.
Okay.
That's 3 words, Doug.
I know, right? Sorry.
There's always one guy, David.
Yeah, it's always
favorite place in the world you visited?
Oh, Switzerland, Lauterbrunnen Valley.
Oh, wow. Okay, we have to chuck you off this stream. It wasn't Sydney, so sorry about that. Okay, some fun ones, quick ones. How many pull-ups can you do in a row?
Well, 3.
That's good.
Over time, you know.
Say "Good day, mate" in an Australian accent.
Good day, mate.
All right, awesome. All right, welcome back, and we'll get to the panel in a second. All right, Mr. Boehm, where were you born?
Sydney.
Beautiful. What's your nickname growing up?
Iceman.
All right, that's going to stick with me. Name your first girlfriend.
Julie.
What's your middle name?
Philip.
How would your parents describe you in one word?
Quiet.
Oh, favorite food?
Chinese.
Superpower?
Connectivity.
Connector. Favorite place in the world you visited?
Bhutan.
How many pull-ups?
Probably 10.
Okay, good. All right, I know you had I know how you can say "Good day, mate." Now fill in the blank. Blockchain is
amazing.
All right, perfect. All right. Well, these are our seasoned experts, David Boehm and Doug Thomas. So let's get straight into the panel discussion. And please think about your questions, put it in the chat, and we'll answer them along the way or at the end. So now we're going to go through some broad strokes in terms of some questions where we are today. I'm going to break it up into the past, the present, and the future. So let's go back in time, Mr. Boehm. Back in 2018 or thereabouts, why did you start Miska One Health Group?
The main reason that Dr. Johannes Wesley and I started, Dr. Wesley is my co-founder, is to bring the incredible medicine that he developed over the last 20 years, using, for the most part, natural products to essentially, the core competency is to calm and balance the human immune system. If you're a healthy person with a healthy immune system, you can pretty much deal with any pathogen, bacteria, virus, whatever, including COVID. We wanted to sort of like digitize his brain and bring the technology through to from Germany to Asia as well. And at the same time, with a little bit of an altruistic motive. Of course, every business has to be commercial, but we just wanted to help as many people as we possibly could to recover and maintain good health.
Beautiful. I was reading your, I think it was on your website and others, but I just noted it down here, which was fantastic. We are a full-service health clinic based in Bangkok, Thailand, that empowers you to understand your unique healthcare profile and unlock the extraordinary you within. Our approach is based in nature, underpinned by cutting-edge medical science, and delivered at the highest global standards of care. It's time to discover the extraordinary you that's within, achieve quality of life, clarity of thought, and health longevity with Miska One Health Group. I thought that was amazing. So, guys, if you want to learn more about that, please have a look at Miska One Health Group, and we will be putting that in the chat as well later on for more information. Now, Mr. Thomas, seems like great minds think alike. Going back to the similar period of time in 2018, why did you start Clear Lake Research?
Yeah, Clear Lake Research was was developed to produce formulations and solutions for drug delivery. I had a lot of clients at the time, and so this was a way to kind of build a company around what we were doing. We subsequently developed 4 patents over different methods of drug delivery, topical and oral, transmucosal delivery, and then went looking for clients. In the meantime, we actually formed a couple of products along the way to demonstrate the value of the type of methods we use for formulation.
Amazing. Sorry. Okay, so I'm looking back. When we were in January 2020, I was in Bali, Indonesia with my family, and all of a sudden we started seeing the staff wearing these masks, and there was panic in the air at the airport. And the Secretary of Department of Health and Human Services declares on around January 31 the novel coronavirus outbreak. Doug, you were called up as part of this US COVID task force. What did that mean, and what is where are we today?
Yeah, so the U.S., Fauci's office really recommended that they start working on vaccines all the way back in November of 2019. So before the public was really aware, the U.S. government was aware very, very early that this outbreak looked to be dangerous. Much like we watch influenza, months before we actually get a vaccine released, we're already aware of what we're looking at. And this one, unfortunately, did jump the pond, and it's a rather large pond. And so the U.S. government started to assemble groups of scientists and people who knew logistics and manufacturers and others that would be able to start to build preparation for the pandemic. And that would be protective gear, certainly masks and gloves that people were wearing, sanitizers, which they started to use. And then ultimately things like vaccines, but they also put out an emergency use authorization program, which would speed these materials through the usual process. And if you showed statistical difference between placebo, which was a control, right? Then, and you seem to be safe and effective, you could continue your studies after commercialization. So you get an early buy-in on commercialization, but you would still complete your phase clinical trials. And then they implemented finally, and where I came in is in the therapeutic side, where they were looking to have groups repurpose existing drugs that were already approved by the FDA. The safety profile was already understood, but as a new indication as an antiviral. And this is where we see remdesivir first being introduced to the public from Gilead. It's a repurposed Ebola drug. And so initially it looked good, but time tells more, right? From statistics with more people. So,
got it. And David, how did COVID in 2020 affect MISCA-1 and your approach? And I recall you hearing you on a panel you called 2020 the year of the shutdown, which is pertinent to what happened. But how did MISCA-1 react back then?
Well, I have to say we reacted slowly. Interestingly, we had an event in March 2020 here in Bangkok where we welcomed one of the members of the royal family. Probably I think it was March 11, probably one of the last days you could actually have an event like that before the COVID lockdowns. But Dr. Wesley was interviewed by the press, and he said, look, whatever this virus is, it can't be bad enough to warrant the lockdown of the planet, because it's going to impact so many people who are unable to control the situation, particularly children. He was mostly worried about children. And we have a children's charity here in Thailand where we run the child helpline, and we know how bad it was for the children when the lockdowns happened, because they kept calling us and texting us with all their concerns. So, and a lot of research has shown that over 50% of children have had a negative mental health impact from the lockdowns. So that's a debate for another day. But Dr. Wesley said that he would rather, as an older person, sacrifice his own life if that was to be the case from this virus, rather than keep all the world shut down. So we didn't really think that there's going to be a protracted lockdown. In Thailand, it started at the end of March 2020 and pretty much lasted for 2 years. So at the beginning, we kind of thought, well, I myself thought that by June 2020, the world will pretty much be going back to normal. So we didn't plan that much COVID protocols, but it quickly became apparent by the middle of the year that this was not going to go away. The lockdowns were going to continue. So like most businesses, we had to pivot to the domestic market. But when you're a business that relies on people coming to travel to see you, it's kind of put you in a very difficult position. And, we're still just recovering from the lack of ability of people to travel. And I always use the example that, I like to fly Emirates Airline. If someone in 2019 had told me that Emirates Airline was going to shut down for 2 months in 2020, I could not have imagined a scenario where that could happen. The biggest airline in the world, running thousands of flights every day. I could not have thought, I couldn't have, in my wildest dreams, thought of what could happen to allow that to occur. So it was a really incredible time, to be in a place like Bangkok and see the busy streets in the middle of the day empty. Basically for someone who travels a lot for business, to see that you're completely locked in one place. So it was a shock, and it was really hard to deal with it. And I can understand people having mental health issues, because
absolutely
there was no precedent. None of us were prepared, and it really there was no. I was listening to a podcast from the guy who was running Carnival Cruise Lines at the time. And he said, when I went to business school, I never studied a case where my revenue went to zero.
Yeah, crazy.
All the cruise lines had to shut down. So yeah, it was a huge impact, and I think we're going to feel the impact of that for quite some time to come, because we are dealing with a lot of issues with mental health for children in particular. But it's
Yes.
happened. We've got to deal with it. But I think it's a good lesson that and the governments have spent so much money, handed out so much money, and I don't think they can afford to do it again.
Yeah. Well, definitely, I remember seeing a statistic that from Save the Children, they estimated 99% of children around the world have been negatively impacted by COVID. You mentioned mental health, nutrition, schooling, education.
Mm.
I was just in Philippines in the poorest city in Philippines called Tondo, and it seems like things are getting back to normal. But you can see the effects as well of what happened, and it's really, really sad to see. Um, there's also a study I was just looking at it the other day that they're now saying that that the COVID is now what they're calling the plague of the elderly, where 90% plus of people that are dying are over 65.
Mhm.
And when you look at back then, when Delta wave came, I think the numbers were like in the thousands per day dying in the US, and now it's hundreds, but still a lot. It's like 2-3 times more than the flu.
Mhm.
How serious is it today, Doug? And it seems like it's mainly hitting the elderly. But what's your thoughts here?
Yeah, it's definitely 65 and older is the age at which people are actually having higher levels of mortality. They make a majority of the mortality. But on the other side, what that statistic doesn't capture is the morbidity side, and that's occurring in young as well. And this is the case where people are talking about long COVID, or other types of tissue or organ damage, like damage to the heart, or damage to the kidneys, and also long COVID, obviously, which is more neurologic, central nervous system. So the disease has changed, and part of the biology of these diseases, and perhaps why we have head colds now, is that these viruses evolve to transmit as quickly as possible. And so when one variant becomes a little bit better at being transmitted, it produces more virus. It creates a more violent cough, or in this case, it moves up the respiratory tract, up towards the nose. It gets to be more and more efficient at transmission. And this can come with some benefits. We're seeing less people on respirators now, because we're not getting acute respiratory distress syndrome, ARDS. But we are getting very, very high transmission rates. And there's a number of different types of fatigues that people are reading about now. One of them is vaccine fatigue. Another is mask fatigue. And another one is Paxlovid fatigue. So Paxlovid, right? Yeah. So it's Paxlovid is primarily, and it's the Pfizer drug. It works well as an antiviral. It's the one mainline antiviral that's being used, but it is really aimed for people who are 65 and above. And so unless you have some sort of comorbidity, and that can be diabetes, it can be asthma, it can be a poor immune system. But in general, they right now it's only being prescribed to people who are older, because they're the ones who are really differentially dying. Over the it's like you said, about 90%. Forget the exact number. Sorry, that's a ranging answer, but
no. Well, you mentioned long COVID, and this is what
Yeah.
we're discussing today as
Exactly.
well. Yeah, for some people, life after COVID has been really tough. They're getting more colds. It's harder for them to recover. People are talking about brain fog or things like that, brain fatigue, as you mentioned. David, this is hitting our immunity, and I know you're a proponent of taking care of your body, and on the health side and the mental side, and a total holistic approach on your body. But what are your thoughts on this long COVID and how it's affecting people today?
Yeah, I just don't Doug mentioned Paxlovid, and our cardiologist, Dr. Ross Walker, who's also from Sydney, Australia, mentioned to me there was a trial published in the Journal of American College of Cardiology that examined the role of Paxlovid and the interactions with the cardiovascular drugs, and it wasn't an especially a good outcome, especially as Doug mentioned, with people with comorbidity. So it's just, you can understand people having these fatigues, because we're into our fourth year of this pandemic now, and people get tired of it, right? Look what's happening in China. People are just so tired of their restrictions and the lockdowns, and we don't want to talk about being restricted in our daily lives anymore. So this fatigue is real, but long COVID is real as well. And as Doug said, it's a condition that's neurological, and there was actually a article released by the Australian Broadcasting Corporation just this morning, talking about another impact of long COVID, which is people continuing to get sick. So I think one of the impacts of COVID, people, it doesn't affect everybody. These viruses impact everybody in a different way. So that's why we always say that we have to treat everybody individually with precision. Guideline medicine just doesn't work in these cases. So a lot of people are getting infected by different viruses over and over and over because of the neurological impact, as Doug mentioned, on their body from the COVID virus. And as Doug said, these viruses are very good at replicating themselves and causing further damage. So, I talked to our medical director, Dr. Wesley, and what he said was very interesting about long COVID. He said, I've been treating long COVID for 44 years. It just never had a name before. Because, he's seen people come to his clinic in his whole medical career with people suffering from things like chronic fatigue syndrome, brain fog, constant tiredness, even extending to a level of depression. And this, years ago, not that long ago, people were actually thought to have a psychic disorder when they came to a doctor with these kinds of conditions, because there was no medical way of treating them. So he said that one great impact of COVID is that now there's some research into these kind of conditions, which we now call long COVID. And what we're finding, our doctors are finding that in over 60% of cases of patients presenting to us with these kinds of symptoms, there's been a reactivation of formerly latent viruses in the body. And the big one is Epstein-Barr virus. And I think we'll hear about that, a lot today. But interestingly, there's been around just now. There's been, I think, 8 billion people have been in the world today. And when you cut down the people who have had COVID, which I think is they estimate around half the population of the world, or 49% to be exact, will have contracted COVID-19 in its various forms. Of those 4 billion people, around about, it's a number that varies a lot, but they think about 30% will be impacted with some form of long COVID. And of that 30%, a majority, probably 2/3 of people, have a reactivation of the Epstein-Barr virus. And that means that there's close to 1 billion people on the planet today that are potentially impacted through COVID of a reactivation of the Epstein-Barr virus. And, Doug can speak more about the technical implications of Epstein-Barr virus, but it's something that we all have inside us. 99% of the population of the planet has Epstein-Barr virus. It's called the kissing virus because we often receive it from our mothers when we're young babies, and she kisses us and she passes on the virus. She doesn't mean to, but that's just how good these viruses are. And quite often it presents itself in the teenage years, and we call that glandular fever, and that's a fairly common infection amongst those people in their teens. It's a lifelong infection that stays in your B cells. It hides in your own immune system, which is quite clever of it. It can be reactivated with prolonged psychological stress, which weakens the cellular immunity. And it's also been associated with various autoimmune diseases and, of course, things like chronic fatigue syndrome. So it's real. People now, the medical world now understands that when you come and you present with something like chronic fatigue, it's not because you have a psychic disorder, it's because you are medically ill. So that's what we're here to talk about today, and let's hope we can give some insight into how best to deal with it and how best to prevent it. Dr. Wesley says that the best way, which a person can just help himself at home, is of course to have a nutritious diet, which is a very good recommendation just for general health. But very importantly, sufficient levels of vitamin A, C, and D in particular. And I was reading, Doug, this week that about a third of the US population is deficient in vitamin D. So that's a good
D3, yeah, it's a very common deficiency, and especially in young people. And so giving supplements is become a kind of standard practice. You'll see that. The rest people are getting from their diet. But there's opportunities for long-acting D3 as well as a therapeutic, and so I agree those are important vitamins.
D3, interesting. Yeah. So you mentioned, he's been Dr. Wesley's been treating for 44 years. So nutritious diet, increase your vitamins. How else has he been treating his patients?
Okay, well, he's actually he actually sent through to me some treatment protocols, and he calls it small budget, medium budget, and big budget, because the different things that can be done together with our partners in Munich, a firm called Tryon Research. We actually have a way of mitigating the reactivation of Epstein-Barr virus. It's an autologous therapy, but it's at the moment it's quite expensive, so it's not for everybody. But basically, he says that for everyone, supplements such as resveratrol and CoQ10 are very important, because one of the impacts of long COVID is on the mitochondria. He would in our clinic, most of our treatment protocols are through parenterals, that's intravenous infusions. So we have a number of infusions that he's developed together with our laboratory partners in Germany, which high dose vitamin C is one. We have a cocktail of vitamins, minerals, and amino acids, which we call Immune, which is an immune system support therapy. So unfortunately, we can only do the infusions in one of our clinics, of course. But people generally come and they take the infusions over a period of time. If it's a particularly serious long COVID condition, it could be that they take five infusions once a day over a period of a week, which would include, as I mentioned, vitamin C, the immune infusion. We have an infusion which is developed on alkaline procaine, which is an intravenous analgesic, and also very importantly is an infusion for anti-inflammatory impact, which is basically curcumin, which is many people say it's the most effective anti-inflammatory in the world, especially when it's applied intravenously, which is an extract of the turmeric plant. And as many of us know, turmeric is a very popular ingredient in Indian food and Indian curries. And so there's a lot of theories about why the population in India weren't as severely impacted by COVID.
Yes.
And a lot of people are saying it's because of the fact that they have this natural anti-inflammatory in their diet every day. But I think the most important thing, if you're just sort of listening at home, is nutrition. Exercise, of course, is always critical. There's many studies now that show how beneficial exercise is in just dealing with any kind of condition, including things like cancer. We do have therapies which we can administer in the clinic for the enhancement of your mitochondria, which is the energy that goes into your cells. But for those of you at home who can't get to the clinic at the moment, as Dr. Wesley mentioned, the vitamins A, B, and D are critically important, as well as a good diet. And I think, again, in the Western world, in a place like Sydney or in USA, unfortunately, we eat too much fast food, too much processed food. And I think that's been a contributing factor to a lot of people getting more impacted by COVID-19 than should have been the case.
Absolutely. Look, I remember taking turmeric, cayenne pepper, vinegar with the mother, and lemon every night. And I was told that it's the gut therapy. And, one thing, I guess, a question to you, Doug, when we start to go into the details, my understanding is that these ACE2 receptors the virus hooks onto and uses to infect us aren't just found in our lungs. People think it's just in the upper respiratory, but it's everywhere from our gut to our vessels, blood vessels. And so to fight these infections, our immune system fights back. But some studies are finding one type of immune cell called the T cell. And please, you're the expert here. If you can give us more insights, is the slowest to return to normal because of COVID. So is this the basic reason we're not bouncing back? Like our immune system is, trying to fight it, but for different types of people that are getting more and more colds or finding it harder to recover or getting these symptoms of long COVID, is this the root cause? Like our immune memory response is not there anymore, or it's not bouncing back.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to come at this. Is it the fault of the person who gets, hit by the bowl, or the bowl hitting the person? In essence, the virus also has a role in overcoming the immune system. It's not just that our immune system in one person is weak and another it's strong. We already know that that is the case. Older people have a weaker immune system than younger people do. And that's why with Shingrix, for instance, you get 2 shots versus 1 if you're giving a vaccine for a younger person. This virus is evolving. It's a virus from an animal, so it hasn't been in people for very long, and it's still trying to find its stride. And we see this happening, kind of like evolution occurring, but it's happening in real time for us. And for researchers in virology and certainly in immunology, we've been watching as the virus first took advantage of this angiotensin receptor, the ACE2 receptor, which is on all tissues. And that became its initial recognition site to get inside cells and begin to replicate and then spread cell to cell from there, and then eventually out. The lungs were involved early because we saw people passing it through respiratory. It still passed through respiration. We saw them succumbing to pulmonary edema, which was the inflammation of the lung lining due to an immune response. It wasn't due to the virus as much as it was due to a response to the virus. And this is another place where Epstein-Barr has in common with this COVID virus, is that Epstein-Barr, the symptoms that we see as an adult are all immune responses to it, except in the case where you see some cancers like Burkitt's lymphoma and nasopharyngeal cancer, which are related to Epstein-Barr. There's a lot that we do understand about how this virus has continued to evade the immune system. That's one of the ways that if you have an RNA virus, okay, so it's a little different than Epstein-Barr, which is a DNA virus. It doesn't change very quickly. It's very, very slow changer. It's a member of the herpes family, which includes varicella zoster, which is chickenpox and shingles, and the standard herpes viruses that we know about, simplex 1 and 2, and cytomegalovirus, and all that family are DNA viruses, and they co-evolved with humans. Been around for millions of years with humans, but this one's brand new. And being an RNA virus, it mutates quickly. It's part of its proclivity, and because of that, a version of the virus in one person that is able to escape the immune system gets passed on to other people will be passed faster than one that is responding to immune cells attacking it and being vulnerable to that. The T cell that you brought up, and the T and the B cells are both involved in this. The B cells are the ones that produce antibodies, and the T cells are the ones that are cellular immunity. We're called cellular immunity. And memory resides in both of these. In the case of a vaccine or a previous insult, you normally, under normal circumstances, and I'm not saying a dysfunctional versus functional immune system, but under normal circumstances, you're able to differentiate between self and non-self. And your immune system trains itself to recognize infections it's seen before. And that way, if you're in an environment where you're getting infected by a specific type of bacteria in the water, and you see it again and again, your immune system will get better and better at being able to allow you to drink that water and not get sick. It's the same thing with viruses. We have a fairly long memory, years and years and years, even decades after you've seen an insult, you can remember what you've seen. The T cells control everything as well. The B cells, like I said, produce antibodies, but they're usually activated by T cells. And T cells can be some of the first responders that tell specific classes of B cells, start producing the antibodies that you make. And each B cell produces a specific antibody to a specific thing. So you have a lot of different types of B cells floating around. And these cells, and David had mentioned this, because this is where Epstein-Barr resides, but the COVID virus affects differentially B cells. It actually messes with a compound that the B cell makes that allows it to become what's called terminally differentiated, which means it becomes a mature B cell that can produce antibodies, and this is messed with this virus. It interferes with the maturation of these B cells, and that's why the antibodies fall off so quickly, and so we don't gain immunity to the virus, and we become naive within a couple of months again, so we can become infected again and again and again. And a study in the US showed that 70% of people have been infected more than once, and some 20% have been infected more than twice. And so people are getting reinfected, and that is different. I mean, when you get the measles, you're basically good for quite some time. You won't get it again. And this is why vaccination with measles is so effective. But in this one, even the vaccines peter out after a period of time, not as quickly as direct natural infection, but it does. You do lose activity over time, and so you become vulnerable again to it. And then the final thing I wanted to bring about long COVID, because we've been watching this. This is something that quite some time ago, in the beginning of when we were getting data out of different regions of the world, we're watching as people had either prolonged positivity to the virus, so they were showing viral positive results, but they weren't showing symptoms, and we're seeing these signs of people having prolonged symptoms without the presence of virus. And so you would test them, and they were negative. You'd test them by PCR; it didn't matter. And certainly when they did slide sections from people who had succumbed, after COVID, and they looked at brain sections, they were not detecting virus, but they were detecting something. And research just coming out of Stanford, and this is all pretty much the last couple of months, out of Stanford and an NIH study as well, and these are Googleable now. I think they've posted them finally. Have seen that the endothelial lining of the brain seems to be involved, and that antibodies that are being produced, and antibodies, like I said, are coming from B cells, a part of our immune system, and they're recognizing the endothelial cell lining, and that includes the blood-brain barrier, and causing a loss of those cells. And that leaking from blood vessels and the inflammation that's caused by the intrusion of immune cells into the brain is potentially leading to a lot of these symptoms we're seeing that are neurologic, while people are remaining completely negative for virus. It doesn't seem to be a direct effect of the virus. It seems to be a direct effect to antibodies being produced in response to the viral infection, and recognizing self. And it may be that there's being viral deposits from the spike proteins that are starting to get onto the surface of the endothelium. But this is an emerging science right now. So anti-inflammatories, anti-immune system drugs, right? Because inflammation is an immune response, may end up ultimately being one of the characters that we're going to beginning to look at. Curcumin certainly is one of these anti-inflammatories. They're immune modulators, so they modulate or reduce the effects of the immune system and the activity of the immune system. And certainly there are places in medicine to save people's lives that are undergoing not long COVID. It's not life-threatening, but certainly some of the other things like leaking in the brain is a bad thing, and so is an immune response, and so that can lead to strokes and other issues, but also cardiac tissue as well.
Well, I hope everyone on Instagram can hear our amazing conversations here, or insightful conversations. We have some questions here on LinkedIn, but we also, if you have any questions on Instagram or any other channel, please let us know. So first question, and then we'll come back to a few more from my end, but some are coming through right now. So Ed is saying, any thoughts/data on Guillain-Barré syndrome caused by COVID? Very specific question. Can you guys see that in the chat?
I'm looking for the chat.
In the comments.
The comments. Oh, Guillain-Barré. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I can got it up now.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just up here.
And
interestingly, my father was diagnosed with Guillain-Barré syndrome. That was probably about 40 years ago, long before COVID. So I remember they had to put him on some mechanism and turn him upside down. I don't know why they did that, but he was lucky that he managed to overcome it, because sometimes people are severely impacted by that syndrome for the rest of their lives. But from a immunologist point of view, I think, Doug, you better talk about that syndrome and why do you think it's occurring? Is it also because of a reactivation of latent viruses?
There's so much we don't know yet about that. We are working on a technology that will allow us to look at those types of questions, because there's probably subcurrent of viruses coming in, like seepage into the human population, and all we really pay attention to are the clinical occurrences. They show up at the clinics or at the hospitals sick, and that's when we look. But we don't look at people who are seemingly healthy. And we looked at the syndrome also when the Zika outbreak happened. We also saw this same syndrome coming through, and it does seem to be viral related, but it may be a virus that is being reactivated. There are a lot of interesting occurrences, like, for instance, when people start chemotherapy, sometimes you see the progression of tumors or other cancers that you were unaware that were actually there, and you start getting in signals from certain inflammatory markers, and it's because our immune system have fought them to a standstill. And then you give a chemotherapeutic agent, and that suppresses the immune system. And so now, for just a little bit, the cancer gets the upper hand because its opponent, which was in balance. And I think that when we look at the immune system, it's not something that's 100% and completely intact. We're still moving through time, and humans have been around for a certain amount of time, and the predecessors as well, building this immune system to help us fight off things that we come in contact with. But it's not 100%. It's not perfect. And we're learning more and more about how it's responding to new things, which it's designed, in essence, to do, but also old foes. And so new virus comes in, it stirs things up, the immune system begins to respond to it, the virus continues to evolve, and eventually we find ourselves in a position where we are now at some sort of balance of life and death, morbidity and health. And the immune system, again, is what we've got to fight with, and whatever clinical practices you guys bring, and whatever medical interventions that we can bring from the standpoint of prevention or treatment. But that's kind of where we are. So it doesn't surprise me that we're seeing some of these old syndromes being associated with this viral infection.
Yeah, it's interesting, Doug. You talk about prevention. Again, Dr. Ross Walker, our cardiologist, he's got a little cartoon that he always shows when he's giving a speech about all these humans falling off the cliff, and there's an ambulance waiting for them at the bottom of the cliff to take them to hospital. And he said, that's the modern medical system. But what we should be doing is putting a fence up at the top of the cliff and stop them from falling off. And that's exactly what you're saying.
Absolutely.
So we're working now with a laboratory in Vienna on a very simple test. You can actually do it at home. You just take out one of these needles, you prick your finger, and you drop 5 drops of blood on a slide and send it to the lab in Vienna. And there's various panels that can be tested. There's a metabolic health panel. There's a healthy aging panel, a skin repair panel, an Epstein-Barr micro RNA measurement. And very importantly for today, there's a panel that determines the level of damages caused by COVID-19 through epigenetic analysis. And most importantly, that once we see the damage that has been created, we actually have therapies that can treat you. So, but if anyone takes this preventative test, and it's actually called prevention, we can actually see things that are going to be happening in your body before they actually happen. So it's much easier to deal with some of these conditions before someone presents in the hospital with a very serious ailment. And so when we started this medical business, it was all about prevention. And Dr. Wesley always says that an absence of illness does not necessarily mean good health, because often these conditions, develop over years, not days or months. And so we're trying to get this message out that people should look after themselves a little bit more. And it amazes me that people who are fortunate to have money and have a beautiful car, you can be guaranteed that car will go to the workshop twice a year to be serviced. And then you talk to the people and they say, well, how about your own health? When have you been to see the doctor about some issues, some prevention? And I feel fine. And there was a cartoon I saw on Twitter about people lining up at 2 counters. One counter was called pills and surgery, and the other counter was called lifestyle change. And there was a huge queue behind the pills and surgery line, but no one in lifestyle change. So I think that one thing that COVID has really taught humanity is that you better look at your lifestyle, and you better look after your body a little bit better than what you've been doing, because if you don't, and your immune system is compromised, as Doug just said, when your immune system is compromised, you could easily get sick or even sicker. And so things like not to harp on about it, but nutrition and exercise and good sleep and all the rest of it, fairly Dr. Walker calls it, the 5 keys of health. It's really very basic. We all know that inherently as human beings, but it took COVID to come along and shock us into a little bit of common sense, I would say.
I have to ask, David, where do you get all these cartoons from?
Well, I probably spend too much time on Twitter.
Oh, got it. Okay, so we have a few more questions. How could the medical community join together to share patient data on long COVID, since it's such a multiple immune disease?
It's a great question, and the more I've been hanging out with scientists and doctors, everyone seems to be really protective of their data, which is a shame, because if we could, as this lady or gentleman asked, if we could share data, it's going to be so much more impactful. So one of the things we're doing as a medical practice is to try and bring the greater community of functional medicine practitioners globally together to do exactly that, to share the information. And I think for whatever reason, people who are integrated functional medicine practitioners are more inclined to share the information that they have, because inherently they want to help people. So we are now setting up educational platforms where we'll be publishing data that we have, and hoping other people will share that with us. We also want to set up an online university for functional medicine, which will invite. We already have over 50 lecturers that will work with us to share information and share knowledge, because I agree with the questioner that the more and more we can share the knowledge, the more information we're going to be getting. Unfortunately, again, the modern medical system is very proprietary, and the big pharmaceutical companies, they want to keep their own data so they can develop a drug and patent it and make a lot of money from it. That's good for them, but it's not good for the community in general. So we're trying. It's not that easy to change a developed mindset, but I know Doug also has bringing together communities of scientists to try and do the same thing, right, Doug?
Yeah, and one of the things that that happened early on, which I was very pleased about, generally when I go and get papers, try to get papers, publications that are about a subject that we're working on. Some are free if they're developed by the government, if they're paid for by the government, but a lot of labs publish those through publish houses that actually charge you to publish it, and then charge the person to read it. And one of the things that happened early in COVID, I mean, really early in 2019, I think we read our first papers, and they are all free right now. And this gives a really good opportunity for people who are interested in reading peer-reviewed publications on the subjects, medical subjects and immunological understandings come out in virology, and certainly even in engineering. This has been a huge boon as these publications have all become free. If you go to Pfizer's site and look for how they make the vaccine, they actually take you on a step-by-step process, including videos and everything of all of their plants that they're producing, packaging, and readying vials. And I think that that's the way even in graduate school I felt. And I remember going to the PI of my group and saying, why can't we just make science free? Why don't we just exchange information? Because I've always felt that that's the way we build things. We build them together. And in some companies refuse actually to file patents because they feel that their customers are better served by an open platform versus a closed platform. And this may be one of the things that comes out of COVID research, is that we are, sharing more and more information through this process. And if we can get a vaccine in record time and therapeutics in record time, and, better understanding of both the immune system and also virology in general in record time, then maybe we will use this as a mode to be able to change the way that science is done. Science is multidisciplinary, and medicine is multidisciplinary. And in order to be able to develop therapeutics and preventatives, and then deftly use them in the medical system, we have to have an open system to do that. And open systems are not expensive. They just mean it just means that we're going to have areas where people are going to need to get incentivized to do work. If you told 1,000 people go and build this wall for these other people, they may or may not do that. We have to incentivize people to do general good for the public, but at the same time, we have to think about how we get people excited about doing that work for free or doing that work for the public good. And I think information and learning and working together are rewards that people respond to. Yeah, I didn't get paid anything for the work that I did on COVID, but I got paid in a different way. It wasn't money; it was working with other brilliant scientists from across the disciplines. And so anyway, so that would be, I think, how we can do that.
Well, I guess that's the idea, one, as well, of sharing this information through these Ask the Expert sessions. Secondly, so it's the collaboration. And I know, Doug, you've got a wealth of experts that we can add to the next series, and also you, David, as well, with Dr. Wesley and others. I'd love to invite others, and then we can break down different topics. Also, third, David, we remember we were talking to Patient Tory Association, which is a global non-profit healthcare organization that has access to 80% of the US healthcare data. And obviously, there's more information that we need. That's why you guys are also creating your own location of all this repository of all this research paper, which I think is fantastic. But how do normal people access? And there's so much information. That's the problem, right? So there really needs to be somebody, to bring it all together. So I think it's great that you guys are having your own initiative, but I think it takes a bigger group, everyone coming together to make that information accessible. And these are all from the experts. Anyway, so we have a few other questions here. So thanks for sending your questions on LinkedIn. And also, if you have any questions on Instagram, please ask it. So we have a question here. Severe neuro-COVID is associated with peripheral immune signatures, autoimmunity, and neurodegeneration. What therapies do you suggest for these extreme cases? I wonder if allogenic stem cell therapies may help. Interesting.
Yeah. So let me, on the neurologic symptom side, and this is what I was talking about before, and now there's more light shed upon this inflammatory response that's going on. And again, it's not a direct inflammatory response to the virus at this point. It seems to be an attack of self by certain classes of antibodies on endothelial walls, and these are found at the blood-brain barrier and then further in on the brain as well. And so kind of where the NIH and certainly Stanford have been kind of looking at this, and this is going to be in the future of therapeutics, will be probably anti-inflammatories, some way to quell, but specifically the immune system. The last thing you want to do is to knock out the immune system when that's also your greatest hope. Therapeutics don't stop 100% this virus. What they do is they give us a chance to have our own immune system kind of retake control. And so I think that will be probably the anti-inflammatories will probably help us for the neurologic symptoms and damage.
Yeah, I think specifically about stem cell therapies, there's just so much that has to be still discovered and learned. I've talked to many scientists involved in research on stem cells, and you can find a scientist to suit any particular viewpoint. Allogenic stem cells, of course, have allogenic stem cells are those derived from stem cells that are not yours. Autologous stem cells are giving your own stem cells back to you. But there's a lot of issues about whether allogenic stem cells will be tolerated by someone. Is there going to be an autoimmune response to the stem cells themselves? So I don't think the jury's really come back yet onto whether these are going to be good therapies for the conditions mentioned. But I think I'm pretty sure that stem cell therapy will be revolutionary in the years to come for various conditions. And I was listening to a podcast yesterday about type 1 diabetes and how they're looking now to use stem cells to regenerate beta cells in the pancreas, which is the problem with type 1 diabetes. Yeah. You don't have beta cells to produce the insulin. So there's promising research on this, and I'm sure some brilliant scientists like Doug will find some therapies in the future, but it's still a bit too early from what I understand.
Yeah, and these are transplanted cells, and so if you're looking to provide immunity to the virus, I think this is a virus that seems to infect anything with an ACE2 receptor, like Chris was bringing up earlier. And that can include also some of these immune cells. So you could put a fresh army in, but if they are susceptible, then they get infected as well. I think like David was saying, that we go in with the general health that we have. We can try to prove that as much as possible in advance, and of course that would be a life choice. Because we don't know when the next pandemic is coming. So you don't want to say, oh, it's a good time to start now when the pandemic is about to hit. You want to have a lifelong behavior. But I think at the same time, viruses spread through all communities. I'm one of the few people I know that hasn't had it, as my wife is as well. But most people have, it seems. And because of that, these are people who have great immune systems, people who have poor immune systems, people who are young, people who are old. It's like the plague. The plague struck everyone in Europe, whether you were a king or a pauper. And so, but the outcomes matter. Whether a person is permanently affected, whether a person is long-term affected, or whether a person has no symptoms at all. These seem to be about the individual, not about the virus. The virus is going into naive populations, and it's a certainty for most people. There seems to be some people who don't seem to get it, period. And they continue to test negative. There's something special about them. Maybe their ACE2 receptors are mutated, and they're able to still convert angiotensin, but they are unable to be a target for COVID, for the current COVIDs. The other thing I'd like to bring up, and I know this is a question that I saw on the list here. If you have been infected and you had mild symptoms, and is that, say that you have a strong immune system? Maybe so. Maybe there was a mild variant. Maybe you only got a little of it. Maybe your immune system was well prepared in advance. But each time you have a bout with this virus, it's like roulette, where you may have a different outcome the next time around, and it may have to do with the type of infection you got. And we were looking at data of these multiply infected people, and one or two cases we saw people who had mild infection, and then the third time they got infected, they ended up with long COVID. And so there's no guarantee of your first interaction being very much like all the others. Oh, it was mild, therefore I don't need to worry about it. I would say worry about every time, and instead, be prepared. Certainly I get vaccinated every time I can. My dance card's full, as they say. I'm on my second vaccine card already. But that's the method that I use. I always get vaccinations for influenza and other things, and I've kept myself masked in public places, and I socially distance still. So I'm treating it like I did in the very beginning of the pandemic. And that's not necessarily the rule for everybody. Everybody finds their own way. But we have to look at our own individual health status. We have to look at our own individual, experience with COVID to decide whether we are likely to experience disease, whether we're likely to come in contact with the virus with the work that we do, and choose appropriate methodologies to keep ourselves safe and live by the rules David's talking about, which is to try to build a better lifestyle for ourselves where we can charge into our next encounter with any infectious disease with the most powerful immune response that we can mount. And that'll also help us in cancers and other areas too, which are outside infectious disease.
And Doug, you mentioned about prevention, masks, and this has been typically the response for different pandemics in the past, the plague and others, social distancing. One thing that you guys, what we have is with Clear Lake is also tell us about Isengard on protection as well, because that's another way of protecting.
Right. And so, one of the things that really impressed me, in 2019, when I started to pick up my older virology books, especially the ones that were on pandemics, as we were starting to set up our groups, I reread The Coming Plague. And in that, there were a number of pictures of people during the Spanish flu. It goes by many names. We'll just call it the Spanish flu, which is, it's during World War I, it's 1918 to 1920, and they didn't have vaccines at the time. In fact, all they had were masks, decontamination of hands, and social distancing. And so, when you look at the pictures, they're very much like we were seeing in 2019, very similar. No change in technology except for the vaccines, which hadn't yet come out for this virus. And I realized that we really needed to start this pandemic and the next with some new tools. We needed certainly new masks, and we looked at mask bypass. We looked at the N95s as being so tight that there's a huge pressure drop across this membrane, basically, and we thought we've got to do something here. We've got to design masks that don't have that pressure drop, so that they don't have bypass when you breathe through them. But the other thing is that hand sanitizers people were using were developed really in the 1960s and became into fashion, more fashion in the 1990s, but they weren't ever designed for an antiviral intervention. They were more like you're going to use it on your hands before you eat, because you don't have fresh water to wash your hands. And so your mom would pull out your sandy wipes and wipe your hands, and then you would go in and pick up the food to drive off with. And so we realized that sanitizers in general and hand washing in general, though effective at removing counts from your hands, they have no persistence. They have they don't have a long-term effect. They decontaminate the hands, but they don't persist afterwards. So I went to work developing at Clear Lake a cream that would persist on the hands after you used it, and would continue.
David, are you still there? Okay, I can't hear you as well. David, you're on mute. Can you unmute, please?
I'm here. Yeah, I think we lost Doug.
Okay, I think we did lose Doug. Okay, we'll come back to Doug. So there was a comment here about the previous conversation on stem cell therapy and combining it with TCM, which I believe is traditional
Chinese
medicine with stem cell therapy. So that's very interesting. Doug's battery has
sort of to follow on from what Doug was saying. I think also from what I understand, and Doug would know much more about this, but viral load is very significant. How much of the virus you're exposed to, depends on how ill you will become in many cases. And I think, Doug's back now, but he was talking about, things like masks. And it's just interesting to see that, now on almost every flight I'm on, very few people are wearing masks anymore, even on a crowded airplane. Although here in Asia, because there's a long culture, a long history of wearing masks. If someone had a cold or a cough, they generally wear masks if they're going out just to protect the rest of the community. I think in Asia, we're probably more community-minded than perhaps in the West. So even though masks are not compulsory in Thailand, most Asian people will be wearing them, but people who are visiting, Western people, generally are not. So it's just interesting, the different approaches. I think Doug would be in the very significant minority in the USA to continue to wear a mask. As Doug said, there's mask fatigue. But I just was saying, Doug, when you were out for a few minutes, that this thing called viral load is quite important too, right?
Yes,
so
absolutely.
If someone with COVID sneezes in your face, you're going to get a lot of virus. And that's
you crawl into their car if they've been driving and they said, "I'll give you a ride. I'm driving over," and for a half hour, they've been breathing in and out. This makes a huge difference, and it's a good point because it explains why the vaccine is effective and why it's not effective at the same time. And you and I had a discussion about this previously, and so maybe I'll spend a moment on this. That when we have our immune system, it's like a little towel that you squirt virus at it, and it absorbs the water, right? And so we're able to fight off most infections. Some viruses are a little more wily; they have a wider spigot, and so they spray all over the place. And your little towel captures a portion of that, but some gets through, and so we get a cold, for instance. Vaccination gives you a larger towel, so that when one squirts you, you're more likely to capture the droplets, even if they hit you with a wider nozzle. But when a person has not been vaccinated and their viral titers are very high, they are spewing out a huge amount of virus. And that's like getting a bucket and throwing it at somebody. And that towel has only so much capacity, but it doesn't have enough to hold back that sheer volume of virus. And so you get sick, you get less sick, you get less wet, right? So now two people who've been vaccinated, one gets sick from somebody who wasn't or something, and their the person who's vaccinated has a lower viral titer than the person who is unvaccinated. So they stay out of the hospital, they stay away from the most severe side of like mortality, death due to it, but they still can shed that virus. And so now they come in contact with somebody who's not vaccinated, and that person gets sick. But another person who is vaccinated, and you'll see this in families where one person is sick and the other people in the family don't get sick. And that's because the viral titer of the person who's been vaccinated is lower than a person who is unvaccinated, and the person who is vaccinated, who's being introduced to them, is more resistant. So the moderate amount of virus hits somebody who has a moderate amount of capacity to absorb virus, and the person doesn't get sick. So I think that when we talk about herd immunity, it's not the classic herd immunity that we used to think about, where everybody's been sick, and so now no one gets sick from each other anymore, and the virus goes away. And that's what we saw in the Spanish flu, is that by 1920, everybody on the planet had gotten sick from the virus. So everybody had memory. The virus wasn't changing. And so we ultimately ended up with an immune population to H1N1. How's that cough, Chris? No, this virus, on the other hand, creates like a tree of different small variants in each individual. It's more like HIV from that perspective. And because of that, if we're infected, we can become reinfected. So we can't rely on our own immune system to completely protect us. And so I think with masking fatigue, and certainly in Asia, yeah, you're right. There, people are much more likely to kind of protect themselves with a mask, or protect others from wearing a mask themselves when they're feeling sick. And we see this in Asia and in Africa with Ebola outbreaks, is that small townships that got infected, they would basically pull branches around the town and let it burn out inside the town. It would keep people out, and it would keep the virus in. And that was a way that people dealt with these outbreaks. And in Asia, personal protection is protection of the group. And here in our rugged, outdoorsy West sort of way, we're like, oh, no, not me. And we end up infecting each other. And so we're looking at a rise right now. Certainly, China's having a huge outbreak. Australia is having its outbreak. We're just seeing a dovetail up in the United States. And so this is the starting of the next wave coming in. The winter draws people inside. The summer brings them out together. We're kind of, it's like you've got a spring and a fall, which is you take advantage of getting out then, because we're not going to see it. So I think we're going to be having a long relationship with COVID. And hopefully it becomes less disastrous, less impactful economically over time. But I don't see people getting better at staving off getting infected. I see instead us learning to live with this virus and its outcomes.
So Doug, we do have 9 more minutes.
Sure.
So I just there is one more question here, but this is the product Doug was talking about, Isengard, which is a persistent hand protectant, which is alcohol-free and lasts for hours. So what people don't realize is that, which I learned from Doug, is that sanitizers only last 2 minutes. So once the alcohol evaporates, you're not protected. But here is a persistent hand protectant that lasts for hours.
It's alcohol-free too, so it doesn't dry the hands. Yeah.
Sorry?
Oh, I said it, but it's also alcohol-free, which means that it doesn't dry the hands with use.
Absolutely. And also David, I don't know if it's premature, but they're working on, as he mentioned, a educational portal to provide a lot of information and research about lots of different diseases and therapies and treatments, etc. So look out for that, and we'll put that in the at the end in the chat so that you guys can follow up on both the Clear Lake Research side and the MISCA One side. We do have 2 more questions. We have 7 more minutes. One question here, and please quick response. Can you assume your health is satisfactory when no symptoms are evident, or is there a checklist for continuous guidance? Who wants to take that?
I think that goes back to what I mentioned earlier from the wise comments of Dr. Wesley, that an absence of illness does not necessarily mean good health. So, and many of these conditions develop over a long period of time in the body. I think that, most people agree that, inflammation is the beginning of every kind of serious condition. Our bodies are designed to have an inflammation response to deal with various pathogens, but we're also designed to self-regulate, and so the inflammation response is due to self-regulate and go back to normal. But in many cases, it doesn't because of the life we live. The environment we're in. A lot of us live in polluted cities. I'll just give you a quick example from myself and why nutrition is so important. I used to have 2 eggs for breakfast every day. I did a food intolerance test, and the number one poor food for me, for David, is eggs. And it doesn't mean for anyone else, but for me, I shouldn't be eating eggs. So I stopped eating eggs. And within 3 months, I lost 2 inches on my waist. I went from 34 to 32 without losing any weight. And why was that? Because of the fact that my gut was chronically inflamed because I was eating the absolute worst food for me. So I really would recommend that people do a food intolerance test, find out what foods they can eat and what food is not good for them, and then avoid those foods. Generally speaking, there's always other delicious foods you can enjoy that are suitable for you. Luckily, wine wasn't on my food intolerance list, but eggs was, so no eggs for me. The other thing that Dr. Wesley asked me to mention, in particular in relation to long COVID and preventing long COVID or any kind of long virus, is the importance of a healthy gut microbiome. Dr. Wesley first started lecturing about the gut microbiome in 2003, and all the other doctors laughed at him and say, what impact could that have on our health? It's just there to digest food, but now we know it's another brain. And so he said, look after your gut. Prebiotics and probiotics are very, very critical to help maintain a healthy gut, especially if you had to take a course of antibiotics, because as we know, it destroys all the bacteria in the gut, not just the bad ones. So prebiotics and probiotics, maintain a healthy gut, get the food that's right for you. And to answer that question, you've got to look after your health long before you get sick so that you don't get sick.
Absolutely. Awesome. Okay, so we are just about to run out of time. I have put more information in the LinkedIn chat, so you can follow up more information about Miska One Health. And I'm just about to send information about Clear Lake Research and also about Isengard product there as well. And Clear Lake, we're providing a discount here as well. Now, any last feedback for the audience? Maybe
there's a question here about the origins, Chris, for COVID.
Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, and I think this is a good opportunity to kind of talk about it. I mean, there's a lot of bad information out there, but when we started, really at the beginning of 2020, the WHO is the only group that had really been to China, and we're working close with the Wuhan Institute and carrying kind of information out of what they'd found in this early part of the pandemic. And it looks like it did arise out of the wet markets in China, which is a practice of bringing meats in from meat that's still alive in from the field. And so they call it bush meat. And this seems to be the source of many infections that have come in, what we call zoonoses. Zoo is in animals, so it's coming in from the outside of human immune experience, and probably initially jumped from animal to animal, maybe jumped from animal to human, but didn't jump human to human, which is the second step. And so this virus, along with other COVID viruses, and we had a near miss with SARS-CoV-1 about 20 years prior. It did get into a human-human transmission, but the WHO worked very, very quickly with scientific community around the world to stop the virus from spreading from that point on. And as people remember, we closed airports and took rapid and drastic action. And one of my friends actually said, so what was the big deal? It never came to anything. I said, exactly. We were able to get to that one. The SARS-CoV-2 came, unfortunately, at a period of time in human history where we had a lot of nationalistic movements around the world. It wasn't, any one country, but a lot of countries decided to go it alone. And because of that lack of cooperation, we didn't react quickly. And the virus got moving worldwide very quickly. And so I think as a cautionary tale that we need to work quickly when scientific organizations around the world start to say, hey, there's something coming. And we need to respond to it quickly, both from a scientific, but also medical and community-wide sort of action to limit the damage, because the damage has now been in the billions and billions of dollars. Economic losses will continue for the next 20 years. And we've had a tremendous loss of life. And I'd love to say, well, we've had scientific gains and medical gains from it, but I'd hate to trade human lives against that. And maybe we will learn our lessons collectively.
Thanks, Doug. Final feedback. We have 1 minute. David, anything we missed? Any last feedback from for the audience?
I just can't stress the importance enough, and this is from every scientist, every doctor. They agree: nutrition and exercise. So if you want to avoid long COVID, focus on your nutrition, get the nutrition that's right for you, and do some exercise. That's going to go a long way to help you avoid these kinds of conditions.
Perfect.
And of course, I would say, and don't get infected. But I agree with everything David said. I think that this is a rule to live by for all things, for cardiac health, for brain health, for body health. Take preventative steps, and then protect yourself. If someone's coughing, just get up and move from where you are to another place. I've noticed that in a correlation that when you hear a guy coughing, you turn around and you look and he's not wearing a mask. Why is it always the guy who's not wearing a mask who's coughing?
Definitely. I do have
that comment for you.
Yeah, exactly.
I do have a similar story recently, but we're run out of time. One, really appreciate your time, David and Doug. Very insightful as always. I'd love to continue talking for hours, and I know we can cover more topics. We're going to do another continue to do this in the new year, January onwards, every month. So we'll bring in our special guests here again, and we'll delve into different topics. Thank you in the audience for your time as well. Thank you for your questions. Apologies if we didn't answer all of them. If you want more information about Miska One, it's in the chat, miskaonehealth.com. More information about Clearlake, it's clearlakeresearch.com. And there's also a special offering for the Isengard product. Happy holidays, everybody. Stay safe, and thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, everyone, for attending today. Happy holidays.
Bye-bye.